I want the starting point for our conversation to be just that you're not a career politician. What on earth led you to decide that you needed to become a politician?
Yeah, I never really decided to become a politician, but I did decide to run for governor. I think, in short, I've always wanted to live a purposeful, meaningful life like most people do. And I actually had a real tragedy in my life when I was 40 years old. I lost my first wife and had 4 little kids and kind of turned my life upside down. But I've said many times, it was tragic but transformational. God used it in a powerful way to kind of change my perspective about what mattered to me and what I wanted my life to be engaged in. So that was almost 20 years ago. I got really involved in nonprofit work. Besides my business, I got involved in nonprofit work and mentored kids in the inner city, which led to a real interest in education, in their education, and subsequent public policy work that I got engaged in. I mentored men coming out of prison through a prison ministry and got engaged in all things criminal justice, just considering how we ought to do things differently. That led to public policy work. I had been engaged in my business public policy around business because I run a company that is in the heating and air conditioning, plumbing, and electrical business. I'm actually a master plumber and went on to get an engineering degree and then ran a company. We have about 1,500 skilled workers.
Can you come to my house on the way?
Yeah. You probably don't want me to come to your house, but I know who to send. Anyway, I found myself engaged in those things and decided that if in fact I wanted to use my life in the biggest way possible to impact people's lives for good, that maybe public service was the way to do that. So my wife and I prayed about it for a year, and we felt like we knew what we were supposed to do, and we made a decision, and we took off. We bought an old 13-year-old RV, and we wrapped it up real nice to look nice, and announced that I was running for governor, and went to 95 counties in 95 days.
I remember when you got in, a friend of mine was working for you, and he called me and he said, "Hey, I got a wild card candidate for you." And I was like, "Who is he?" He said, "Well, he's running for governor of Tennessee." I was like, "Well, what's his background?" And he started telling me, and said, "So you mean he's not a member of Congress?" He said, "No." And he said, "And no one's going to take this guy seriously, and I'm telling you, he's going to be the governor." And I was impressed with your launch video and just your background and life story, and dealing with my wife's situation with cancer and the story of your wife passing and having kids. It deeply affected me and resonated with me. And yet again, it was another trend of someone who cared about the situation, was in business, had a personal background that connected with people, and you're running against a bunch of people who just their career was politics.
Yeah.
And here you go. I remember people telling me, I was at a dinner in Nashville, saying, "Well, he's a great guy, but he's got no shot." And here you are.
They told me that a lot too. So. You know what it's like to go to Reagan Day dinners and stand up there and do your thing, and everybody else does it, and then people come up to you after and they're like, "You're a great guy, but I wish you could be the governor, but I don't think you're gonna. I don't think you're gonna be."
And yet.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I have learned now that you don't have to worry, people will forget in the next three and a half years, but the governor of Tennessee went to Auburn.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So now
I kept that very quiet in the campaign. Very, very quiet in the campaign. Now I'm a big UT fan and a big Auburn fan at the same time.
So what's been kind of the thing that it just opened your eyes more than anything else now that you've been elected?
Oh gosh, I think people say, what's the most surprising thing about it? The schedule is surprising. I didn't realize how difficult that would be. But being not ever having been in politics and then stepping into this world, it is a jolt of politics. It actually was surprising to me just how political the decision-making process is, how political this world is, the world of government. That was a surprise to me. I had to learn pretty quick that politics plays a role in every decision that people make. And sometimes a lot of folks make decisions based on politics a lot more than based on what they really think might be the best decision. That was a surprise. You don't do that in business. And so that was the most surprise. And then really just the real world of being a public figure, everything you do being scrutinized, everything you say being parsed, and generally, oftentimes being turned into something that you didn't really say, or at least being characterized as something that you never intended in that conversation. Those are all new things that you don't deal with in the private sector that I knew were coming, but if you've never experienced them, then you don't know what it's like. It's quite a surprise.
Now, we've got a good helping of people from Tennessee here and around the nation.
Raise your hand if you're from Tennessee.
Are you all here?
Yeah, there we go.
Them?
There we
We
go.
got them back there.
I like that.
I want to ask you just if you would, as governor of Tennessee, talk about the concerns in Tennessee.
You know, I approach this thing from what I view to be the greatest difficulties or the struggles or the things that matter most to people. One of the things that you really find when you travel a state like Tennessee and you go to 95 counties in 95 days, which is how we started our campaign. I'm a farmer by background. My family's in the beef cattle business, so I grew up on a farm, still live there, go home every weekend, very involved in the ag business besides my mechanical service business. And so to highlight what I believe is a real problem in rural Tennessee, I actually took a tractor from our farm and drove it from Mountain City to Memphis, which is 758 miles on a tractor. Wow. And when you do that, you just meet regular, everyday people who aren't nearly as concerned about all the noise that goes on in politics and on TV as they are concerned about having a good job and a good school for their kid and a safe neighborhood. And that's what matters to people. And that's what I decided to campaign on. It's what I decided to do as governor. So as soon as I got into office, those are the things that I had promised the people that I was going to work on and put my primary focus in. And that had been actually my private life. I mean, part of the honor of this job is you carry things around in your heart for a long time. I worked in prison ministry for 20 years. Then to be able to be the governor and implement substantive investments around reentry that will change recidivism and lower the crime rate in Tennessee, to carry that around for 20 years and then to be able to do something about it powerfully, it's a real gift. I was in the heat and air conditioning, plumbing, electrical business. I employed 1,500 skilled tradespeople. I know as much as anybody how we have ignored vocational and technical education in our schools for so long. I struggled to find skilled workers as employers, started our own trade school and ran 1,000 people through it over the last 10 years. So this year, we made a significant investment financially and otherwise in a legislative piece called the Governor's Investment in Vocational Education Act, the GIVE Act. We're establishing CTE programs all across our state. I said on the campaign trail, we need to change the way high school looks, and now we're going to. And I'm excited about that. I talked about rural. You know, I decided to use my executive power as it were made available to me. So executive order number 1 for the Bill Lee administration was to create and enforce every department in the state of Tennessee, 23 departments, to provide me a statement of impact on how their individual department impacts the 15 most distressed rural counties we have, and then subsequently provide a strategic plan on how they're going to improve those rural counties. So to carry around things for years in your private life and then to be able to do them in the public sector has just been a tremendous honor.
You mentioned rural life, and yet in Tennessee, one of the things you're now having to deal with is this explosive growth in Nashville. Yeah. And how do you balance I mean, we're dealing with this here in Georgia as well, the growth in Atlanta versus the rest of the state, that oftentimes you have residents who feel like they're ignored, but oftentimes you do have to deal with this massive growth that's happening in.
That's right. And it's one of the reasons I made this executive order. It's surprising the power of elevating a conversation. Like, if a guy runs around for 2 years campaigning on how important rural Tennessee is, and then drives a tractor, and then signs an executive order, it becomes a conversation that everyone in Tennessee knows this governor cares about rural Tennessee. And so therefore the departments focus on it. And I share with our people all across state government, but also across the state of Tennessee, yes, we have an incredibly prosperous and remarkable city in Nashville. It is explosive. There's 80 people a day moving there. There's economic prosperity. It's tremendous growth and the challenges that come with that. We also have some other remarkable cities, Chattanooga and Memphis and Knoxville and the Tri-Cities that are doing great things and have a lot of positive things going for them. But it's not an either or for me. It's a both and. We can, and I think Tennessee may be a leader in that just because we're putting such a focus on it, because the whole country has this rural problem. The Wall Street Journal did an article about a year ago entitled "Rural America is the New Inner City." And we all have this problem, but I want Tennessee to lead. I want us to show how you can actually, through workforce development in rural communities, through expansion of broadband to every community, through the use of telemedicine for healthcare, for distance, folks that live out in distant counties, distance learning for those that don't have a computer science teacher in their school. We can give children the opportunity to stay in their rural communities and to start their businesses there and to have an economic life there. I believe we can. I'm not going to ever stop until I'm convinced we can.
One of the things I learned having family now that lives in north of Memphis is in Georgia, we talk about North Georgia, South Georgia, Middle Georgia. You got the West, the East, and Middle Tennessee. And you go from the mountains on one side to the Mississippi River on the other. Yep. Massive geographic change, and also wealth and poverty shifts along the way, racial makeups shift along the way. And oftentimes you hear these stories about in the Appalachian areas, people get left behind, but also in the Mississippi area, people get left behind. There's a lot of focus in the growth of the cities, Memphis, Nashville, Chattanooga, Knoxville, the education corridors there. What does it take for you as governor, when you're planning out your office and your policies, to think you've got such regional diversity in the state, and with that, population diversity?
We call it, it's oftentimes been called the three states of Tennessee, and they're very different in geography, in the makeup of the folks that live there. But so much of the value of being a business person, I think, and then stepping into this role is 35 years I worked in business. 25 years I ran that company, and we had a lot of growth, and we have offices not only in Middle Tennessee, but northern Alabama and southern Kentucky, and we have multiple offices around. And they're really different. The offices are really different, and the markets that they serve there are really different, and the workforce in this community or that city or that region is different. And it allowed me to spend 25 years managing a company that had really diverse offices in many ways, and yet figuring out how it is that this company is going to succeed as a whole. First of all, how we had a theme that we called One Lee Company, so that everyone knew that they belonged to the whole, and that as different as they were, that we had a common goal. That's a whole lot of how I want to govern. Different diversity of demographics of the people, of the geography, of the economies. But we are Tennessee, and we have much more that unites us than divides us. And we have to have a common vision for the success of our state. We just did a very historic education reform, an education savings account bill that passed that was that have been tried multiple times in Tennessee. I really believe, I'm a strong believer in school choice. And I worked in the inner city with disenfranchised kids. I've often felt like that they needed more than what the status quo education system would give them. This education savings account targets low-income kids in failing school districts. As I talked to other folks who were skeptical and opposed, and what about my school district? I said, we have to remember in Tennessee, if those kids in the inner city are failing, we are failing. We in Tennessee pay the price if those kids in that zip code pay the price for education. Just in the same way that what happens in rural Tennessee matters to every Tennessean. Even if they live in the Gulch in downtown Nashville in a 40-story high-rise, it matters to them what happens up in Union County, to me. And that business approach of going to the offices that are struggling, propping up the places that need it, put funding where it's needed to make sure that the entire company succeeds. That's how I view my role as governor.
Yeah, I'm sitting here listening to you, and it just as an aside, I've interviewed a lot of people who are elected. I won't use the word politician. Used a lot of elected officials over the years, and even some from business. And you have spent more time than anyone I've ever interviewed, I think, talking about what you learned from your businesses and applying it to government. And that strikes me as very interesting, even among the people. And the only other exception to that, frankly, is the president, who I've talked to in the past before he was president about running businesses. And I know that is a big. I'm trying to formulate my question as I ramble, if I'm honest with you, because I'm struck by it now that I'm going through the list of all the people I've talked to who ran as businessmen running for office, and when they're there, you never hear them talk about how they're implementing what they did in business. It's just it's a unique, I think, approach that you're taking, and I commend you for it.
Well, there are big differences, but there are a lot of things that are really a lot alike. Particularly when you're a governor, it's different than being the president, for example, I think, or a senator or a congressman. One of the things, as a business person, my primary goal, or one of the most important things that I've got to do, is run a state that's fiscally well managed. If you don't manage your costs in business, you go bankrupt. If you don't manage your costs in government, you raise taxes. That's the only option you have. And for me, that's a terrible option. So, the first thing we did was we presented a budget that called for cuts, that invested the largest single investment in the state of Tennessee in our rainy day fund. We have over $1.1 billion in the rainy day fund. Because this economy, the other thing you learn from business is this economy is not going to stay like this. And 35 years in business, it was up and down, and you better be ready for the next downturn or you're going to be in trouble in business. And when you're in trouble, there's no way out. That's the philosophy I have toward a budget. In Tennessee, by the way, U.S. News just a couple months ago picked us as the best fiscally managed state in the country. We have. And you know what? It's really conservative principles. Conservative principles work. Economic conservatism works. We have some of the lowest taxes in the country. We have no income tax. We have almost zero debt in our state. We pay as you go for our roads, so we don't borrow to pay. And we have, by some measures, the third best roads in the country. And one of the lowest tax bases per capita in the country. When you give businesses and individuals, when you don't take their money in taxes and you allow them to spend it in the ways they want to, economies thrive and things work and jobs are created. And yes, we have some real challenges in our state, but we're doing some things right. And it's because conservative policy around fiscal policy is much like running a business. If you don't have conservative fiscal policy in your business, you won't stay in business. And so that's another way I've really tried to bring my experience forward.
My wife, who has a Harley, loves the roads in Tennessee.
I need to meet your wife. It's awesome.
Yes, she loves to. I don't ride a motorcycle, and her on one has basically become my life motto is now, why pray when I can worry? When she's out on her motorcycle, but she has taken women's road trips up to the mountain roads in Tennessee and loves them. Scares me to death, but she loves them.
Awesome.
Now, in the few minutes we have left, I want to shift gears a little bit, touching a little bit on biography. When I found out you were running and I was interested in who you were, reached out to a friend of mine, works in Nashville, who I wouldn't say he's a friend of yours, but knows you. I'll tell you who he is off stage. But I said, well, what about this guy? And he was trying to size up where you would be as a candidate. And he said, I know if he gets it, he's been tried, and now he can be tested by running for office with his faith. And I really would like to talk to you about that, because what has come up over and over and over again with people who have sized up you and your campaign, who know you, has been the role of faith and what happened with your wife and how that plays out in not just politics, but how you look at the world and govern the world.
Yep. Yeah, I grew up in a family of faith, but that single event at age 40 was profoundly impactful in the way I viewed not only my relationship with Christ, but just my faith, eternity, the brevity of life, the things that matter and things that don't matter. I remember running for office and people would say, are you sure you're up for this? You're a nice guy. You're a really nice guy. You're a business guy and all that, but this is brutal stuff. Do you have thick enough skin? And I remember sitting there looking at them and going, look, I know what a bad day is. And there isn't going to be a bad day like that on a campaign trail. I went through a period of time. I lost my wife. My oldest daughter tried to take her life after her mom died in a very awful experience that almost cost her life. And it was incredibly challenging for me. And my business almost went broke. I'd left it for a couple years and to take care of my kids. So I went through about 3 years of just, for me, it was a brutal 3 years. And everyone, there would be more brutal stories than that out here. We all go through really difficult things in life. But it really does shape our perspective in many ways. And God used that in a real, like I said, a real powerful way. First of all, it did make me realize what's the worst that can happen here. And when you sit around the table, I remember when we were about to lose the company, or I thought we were, my son was, I think he was 10 years old, sitting around the dinner table, me and my 4 kids, and he had seen the stress of Dad and conversations I'd had with people around me. And he sat at the dinner table one day and he said, Dad, are we going bankrupt? And he's 10 years old. And I sat back and I said, well, we might be. And I said, but let's talk about that as a family. So we went through this conversation. I said, here's what's going to happen if we go bankrupt. We had some friends that were building a house and they were living in a double-wide trailer up on their farm. And I said, you know the Jensen's house and that trailer, that big? And they were like, yeah. I said, we'll probably move into that. And they were like, that's cool. We love that place. And then I said, we won't have to leave the farm because it was a family operation. It wasn't just mine. But we'll move out of this house. You'll probably stop going to your private school. We'll go to this, Fairview, and we can't go to Seaside anymore for vacation. We'll probably go to, I don't know, to a state park and camp out, and I laid out all the things, and I said, I'll get another job, and we'll do all of this. And my kids all sat around, they were like, okay. And I remember walking away from that conversation thinking, that's exactly right. Okay. Nobody's dying here. And these are children and a dad who knows what it's like for something much, much worse than that to happen to your family. And I'll just say it shapes your approach. It shapes the way I look at everything in my life. I know what the end of this journey is like, and it's awesome. And meanwhile, it's a wild ride, and I'm proud to be on it.
Governor Lee, thank you.
We're done.
I'm going to ask you one more question. I'm going to keep you for one more. We got about 5 minutes on the clock. I try to keep the trains on time, but I want to follow up on that, though.
Right.
Because you deal now in a world, And we saw this, and I don't want to drag you into the news with the speaker in the Tennessee legislature and whatnot, but you are surrounded by people who view politics almost as a game.
Yep.
And people who have made a career of it. And you've got a very unique perspective. I don't want to just ask you how do you navigate that, but how do you try to impact the people who view this as a game because that's all they've done?
Yeah. I think we just have to keep walking forward and moving in ways that show the things that we say. So everyone knows that it's not what you say, it's what you do. I am happy to publicly talk about my own faith or my faith story and how it's impacted my life. I also recognize that there are a whole lot of people who don't feel that way. They don't think it's important. They don't think it should mix. They don't think, and in fact, this whole political game really doesn't. That's really not a part of it. But I don't. I'm fine with the fact. I've come to this realization that the world is full of all kinds of people who have all kinds of beliefs, and I really am generally one who says people should live the way they want to live. Now, I have an idea about that. I have opinions, I have strong convictions, I have strong beliefs. I'm happy to share those. I'm also happy to live them out in the policy that I move toward. But getting into the back and forth of politics, as opposed to just saying, this is who I am, this is my core value belief, and this is where I'm going to go with it, and kind of jettisoning the rest of it off to the side. That's really been my approach. You know, our campaign was a little bit like that, very divisive and negative, but I decided not to do that. I said, and my wife and I sat around and said, you know what, it's just not who I am. I'm not going to do it that way. And we may win and we may lose, but this is how I'm going to do it. It worked out, and that's why I want to govern. I'm a person who believes you can be principled, conservative, convicted, have strong core beliefs, and I still have a great desire to be the governor and the servant of every single Tennessean, and the ones that violently don't agree with me, and I genuinely desire to serve them. And I think if we governed that way and we were more focused on really those things that are commonly interesting to every single citizen, then the stuff that's out here that makes a lot of noise and is so divisive and so disruptive, it would certainly be less elevated than it is today. And that's part of my goal. That's the way I'm going to govern. And if it works out for me, great. It is the way I'm going to do it, and it will work out for me. Whether it politically does or not, it will work out for me.
Governor, I know you had to change your schedule to get here, and I can't thank you enough. This has been a wonderful conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Proud to do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Governor
you.
Bill Lee.
Thank you. Thank you.